Have you ever struggled with the pronunciation of a foreign language? Learning the pronunciation of any foreign language, for that matter, is a little bit challenging, a little bit tricky for a number of reasons. But there are some languages which are particularly difficult to pronounce, depending on your mother tongue. For example, it's really difficult for a native English speaker to pronounce languages such as French or Russian or Arabic. And for the rest of the world, English, the very same language I am speaking right now, is quite difficult to pronounce. Hi, my name is Luca from Lampariello.com, and today I'm going to talk to you about how to tackle and how to learn the pronunciation of any language, and in particular of difficult languages. A few months ago, I decided to learn a beautiful Scandinavian language, Danish. Now, if you've never heard Danish, Danish sounds like this.
Ja, det skal vi. Det er en selvfølge. Det hører med jo. Det skal vi have alle sammen.
Yeah, that's right. It sounds like they have a big potato in their mouth. And that's what actually other Scandinavians and other people say about them. In general, every language that you learn will have a different inventory, phonetic inventory. That is the amount of sounds that are contained in the language. And this inventory is different from your inventory, the inventory of your own native language. That's why it is difficult to acquire the pronunciation of any other language. But there is a key point to take into account. 10 or maybe a little bit more than 10 years ago, I started learning Swedish. And like every other language, I just got in the language, I was listening, I was reading, I was doing a lot of things, I was exposing myself to the language. And then I made a YouTube video, my first YouTube video, where I also spoke Swedish, and I got some feedback about my pronunciation and intonation, and it both turned out to be off. And I started asking myself, what's wrong? What did I do wrong? Well, I neglected the fact that Swedish is a semi-tonal language and has pitch accent. So that's a very peculiar feature of Swedish. Just to give you an idea, you can have a word that can be pronounced in two completely different ways. For example, you can say anden, which means duck, or onden, which means spirit. And I had completely overlooked this aspect of the language. As a consequence of that, I developed wrong phonetic patterns. And a few years down the line, I just figured out that my patterns were actually wrong. Now, if you figured that out, that's great. But the problem is that figuring it out and making it happen, that is fixing or reducing your accent, as someone says, is quite difficult to do. Imagine a knot. The tighter the knot is, and the better it is if this knot is tied well. But if the knot is tied wrong and you have to untie it, that's quite a lot of work to do, and most of the time the game is actually not worth a candle. Okay, now you know that you have to start head on, you have to start from the very beginning and take care of your pronunciation and your intonation. But in any language, there are some sounds which are particularly difficult to pronounce. For example, the French r, or the Italian Spanish r, or the ein. I cannot pronounce it, I don't speak Arabic, but you get the idea. And in Danish, you have the infamous soft D. For example, when I was in Paris, I met a Danish girl who had me pronounce Call me flu. I still don't pronounce it well, maybe a little bit better. And I could not, by looking at her face, I could not tell what kind of sound that was, how you could produce it. And when I started learning Danish, I tried my best at looking at some explanations, how do you put your mouth, and I was reading instructions and here and there, and I was hearing the sound and I was trying to reproduce it until I stumbled upon a video. In this video, this Danish guy makes the case that in order to pronounce the soft D, you have to start from a given position of your mouth that you already use in your own native language and move from there. So just to give an example, What he did is he said, you can watch the video by clicking on the link in the description box. What he does is very simple. He says, in order to say L, the soft D, which actually sounds a little bit like an L, try to start from the position of the L in your mouth. So if you say L, you will see that, try yourself now, you will see that your tongue goes up, touches the palate. L, this is the way you pronounce L in English, L in Italian, slightly different, but the concept is exactly the same. So we have a tendency in our own native language, if your native language is English or even Spanish or Italian, to pronounce the L by putting the tongue on our palate. But in Danish, that doesn't happen. You have to put the L, you have to keep your tongue down. And it's difficult. So at the beginning when I was trying to say L, it constantly came up. You went up the roof of my mouth, L, L, L. And then I told myself, you know, how do you solve this? And then the guy happened. So he said, take 2 fingers and put the fingers on your tongue so that you keep it down. So this way. I know it could be disgusting, but roll, call. So you try, and then you try a few times, and then it actually it happens. It causes your mind and your muscle memory to get accustomed to this new configuration. And then all you have to do is to keep going, and then you don't need these fingers anymore. So like I started like this. Difficult to pronounce because I have 2 fingers in my mouth, but then I started saying it and I started liking saying it. For example, in Danish you say already, you say allerede. So, call me flu, allerede. And truth be told, I am sure that I still do not pronounce it correctly, but it was a huge improvement and I was quite frustrated at the beginning. This goes to show that if you put your mind to it, if you know how to learn sounds, if you use a combination of channels, which is audio channel, visual, explanations, but also you'll learn how to leverage the positions of your mouth when it comes to producing sounds in your own language. In order to produce other sounds, you can accomplish anything. You just need to know where to start from and how. Learning to pronounce, to actually produce and articulate sounds in your mouth is fantastic. You can train with syllables, you can train with single letters, you can train with words. But the real magic happens when you actually start producing sentences. Because the truth is that we communicate through messages that are coded in sentences. So when you learn the pronunciation of a foreign language, make sure that after some training with single sounds, you take care of how you pronounce and utter entire sentences. In the example of the soft D, what I started doing is I started saying very short sentences that chain words that contain D, and I kept saying them over and over. This allowed me to learn the articulation of the soft D, but at the same time learn the intonation in sentences. Remember that we communicate in messages. These messages are coded in chunks, and learning in chunks is much faster and more efficient than learning the single components of the language. Okay, this is the end of the video, unfortunately, but here is the wrap up. First, make sure that you tackle pronunciation and intonation, the phonetic fabric of a language, head on from the very beginning to get patterns right, because if you do that, your life will get much easier down the line. Second, make sure that when it comes to particularly difficult sounds to pronounce, you actually train and you try to figure out how to pronounce these languages, not just by sound, not just by hearing, not just by looking at explanations, but also to see visually how people pronounce, how native pronounce these sounds, and whether it's possible just to move from a position of your mouth that you already know and you already used in your native language or a language you speak. And third, make sure that you move from training on single sounds to training on short fragments or sentences or phrases, and you can kill the proverbial 2 birds with 1 stone. Now, I got a challenge for you and some more info about this topic. If you have a camera and if you have a good microphone, make a video of yourself trying to train on a specific sound and trying to say a few fragments or a few phrases, a few sentences using that sound. So if you have a camera, make a video of yourself training on a specific sound that you find difficult, and remember to train not only on single words that contain the sound, but also on short sentences. And if you want to know more, please click on the link in the description box. I have written a very extensive article about this very same topic that you can read and listen to, and of course, drop a bunch of comments in the comment section below. Thank you very much, and see you soon on YouTube.